discussion of the film and TV industry in the COVID-19 era. This series is presented by Green Slate and produced by the Catch a Break podcast. But this episode today, we came through, Sista Brunch came through, we kind of took over, but we got permission, and that's us, Sista Brunch, and we'll tell you a lot more about Sista Brunch during this webinar. So my name is Fanshen Cox, and I'm the co-host of the Sista Brunch podcast, and I'm here with our executive producer, Christabel Nsiah-Buadi. We are guest hosting today's panel. So Sista Brunch is a podcast all about Black women plus, so trans, cis, non-binary, thriving in entertainment and media careers. And you can find us at sistabrunch.com and all of the podcast places where you listen. We would love to extend a huge thank you to the team at Catch a Break for letting us take over today. Here's a little bit more about Sista Brunch before we get into the panel. So, as well as EPing our show, the amazing, fabulous Christabel Nsiah-Buadi is also a writer for British Vogue and The Independent. And prior to this, Christabel led award-winning news coverage for national outlets like National Public Radio, and she's reported on representation in the media for American Public Media and for KPCC. She has also produced interviews with the global icons like Hugh Masekela, I know I should practice that, and covered world-changing events, including Hurricane Katrina, Guantanamo Bay, and most US elections since 2004. I'm so sorry, sister, especially this year. Okay, she's with us and she's okay. These days, she creates content for media organizations and develops podcasts through her company, My Lens Media. So yes, check that out because she's an incredible producer. My Lens Media LLC. Projects under this banner include Change Makers for the American Public Media Show Marketplace, Media Disruptors for Public Radio International, and Home from Home for KCET.org. And Sista Brunch.
Goodness, you made me sound so good. Thank you, sis. Thank you, Fanshen. and Fanshen Cox, my colleague for today, is the award-winning playwright, actor, producer, and educator. And she just wrapped up 7 years. 7 years, Fanshen? Really?
Yes, girl, yes.
Of touring her one-woman show, One Drop of Love, which you should absolutely check out. She is also a producer and development executive at Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's Pearl Street Films. She also serves on the board of the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative and on the Kennedy Center's Turnaround Arts Equity Advisory Committee. Okay. And you're also the co-author of The Inclusion Rider, which was announced at the 2018 Oscar Awards by Frances McDormand. Was it 2018? Was it that long ago?
Yes, it was that long.
Goodness. Wow. But we'll definitely be talking about that on.
That was a great moment. I loved it. I was so happy. I loved it.
It was fantastic. So I'm really excited because we will definitely be talking about that on today's panel. But before we start, a little housekeeping. The discussion, as you probably know, is being broadcast simultaneously on Facebook. Hi, Facebook folks, as well on Zoom. And if you'd like to ask a question to our panel or with our panel, you can share it on whichever format you are watching from. Just type it in and that will get fed to us. So over to you, Fanshen.
Yes, this is the final episode of the Way Back series, how entertainment and production will navigate getting back to work while still living with this COVID-19. In this episode, we want to talk about how we are going to ensure that all of us keep moving forward, especially with diversity, inclusion, and representation, because Kalpana knows we've already gotten some excuses like, we have to focus on COVID and not on inclusion. We're here to say you can do all of the above. And our wonderful guests are going to talk to you more about how to do that. And make sure we're not going to lose any ground to the recent work stoppage and the scarcity it created. So to do this, we have assembled this badass panel. I hope my niece is not listening to this. Just close your ears. Okay. So
your niece she's going to be a badass on her own. She's a badass.
That's a good phrase. We're going to keep that.
You, baby. Okay. So An experienced and skilled producer, consultant, executive, Yolanda Cochran is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, serving on the executive committee and of the Executives Branch, Television Academy of Arts and Sciences, and Board of Directors of the Producers Guild of America. Very important, serving on the One Guild Steering Committee, as well as the Production Safety Practices Task Force. Now, in the early days of COVID-19, she took on the role of SVP Live Action Production at ViacomCBS's Nickelodeon and Awesomeness, yes, where she oversees scripted and unscripted series and specials. In 2016, Cochran produced a documentary short and podcast miniseries called Breaking the Glass, highlighting and seeking solutions to challenges specific to gender and race in the entertainment industry. Her producing credits include The Book of Eli, Dolphin Tale 1 and 2, Something Borrowed, Joyful Noise, Lottery Ticket, The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants 2, Beautiful Creatures, Point Break, and Hindsight. It's so much, Yolanda, so much, starring Sandra Bullock, and it was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. Kirsten Schaefer, our next one. Kirsten Schaefer is the Executive Director of Women in Film Los Angeles, the preeminent organization that advocates for women in the screen industries to achieve parity and transform culture. She has been instrumental in launching ReFrame. Get to know ReFrame if you don't know them. They're doing great work. It's an industry-wide initiative to advance inclusivity and gender equity. She also has started a variety of programs at Women in Film to increase the skill set and opportunity for film and TV makers. I was part of Insight, and it was fantastic. I got to meet some incredible mentees through that program. Before this, she was the director of programming and then executive director of Outfest, yes, which is actually, I think, opening this weekend. She is widely credited as having grown Outfest into the leading LGBT media arts organization that it is now. Kirsten is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Welcome, Kirsten and Yolanda.
And Marcei Brown grew up in the movie industry. She is a native Angelino, unlike my good self, as you can tell by this accent. She started her career as a production assistant and worked her way up to assistant director, UPM, and producer. I'd love to know what those things are. Those of us who kind of work in the periphery or different industries would be curious about that. Her most recent projects include Songbird, which was the first movie produced in Los Angeles during the COVID-19 lockdown. That must have been crazy. I wonder if we can touch on that. Black Klansman and the Academy Award-winning film Get Out. Oh, okay. Marcei is also the co-founder of Catchlight Studios and a partner in Crewvie, a global inclusion database, which we will definitely be talking about during this conversation. And then we have Kalpana Kotagal. She is a partner at Cohen Milstein, a member of the firm's Civil Rights and Employment Practice Group, and chair of the firm's Hiring and Diversity Committee. Miss Kotagal makes you sound very official. I feel that's how we should be. Miss Kotagal is the co-author of The Inclusion Rider, along with the fabulous Fanshen, which was referenced by Frances McDormand in 2018, together with Fanshen, as I mentioned, and Dr. Stacey Smith of the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative. And she's currently serving as an advisor to noted filmmakers on a film addressing the issues of gender and pay disparities. Wow, we've got some heavy hitters on here today. So let's get into it. Definitely. And let's kick in with the first question, which I'm going to throw to you, Kalpana. In terms of the Inclusion Rider, which a lot of people have heard bandied around, it was all in the press. Can you really break down what that means? Because people got excited about it, but I think when you break it down, people kind of need to know what the nitty-gritty is.
Yeah, I totally think that's exactly right. It became a phrase that just didn't have any meaning. So let's go back and put some meaning into it. at its heart, the inclusion rider is a contract template that Stacy and Fanshen and I wrote. It's flexible, it's adaptable, and the idea is that it's a framework for talent and their lawyers and their agents, content creators, directors, producers to take into negotiations. And the idea here is that it provides a process for auditioning for on-screen roles and for interviewing for crew roles. We wanted to create a process that really slowed down the hiring process and the casting process, so that in that process we could unpack the places where implicit bias can take hold and start to break down stereotypes to encourage the casting and hiring of highly qualified folks from underrepresented backgrounds. So I think that's it in a nutshell. I'm sure Fanshen has more to add to that, given her work on the writer with me, but I think that's sort of it in a nutshell. I do want to emphasize two things about it. One, it's flexible. It's meant to be tailored. The idea here is that you can work with counsel to make it into something that works for your project. And then the second thing is that we are very explicit about avoiding things like quotas. And I think that was a kind of mistaken understanding of it when it first kind of broke onto the scene. It doesn't use quotas. Quotas are not allowed in the United States, and we were very careful to frame it in a way that would steer clear of that landmine.
That's interesting, because as someone who works in as a journalist, I'm a journalist, works in public media, I know that a lot of people go down the check boxes, right, in terms of the people that they're looking for. So how does that kind of push people away from checking those boxes? Does that make sense?
Look, yeah, I mean, I think I understand what you're asking. And I guess I would start from the place that it's really important to remember when we are doing this work of deepening diversity in our candidate pools and in hiring, to break away from what I think is a commonly an easy trap to fall into, right? That somehow you have to choose between checking boxes on diversity and finding talented folks. And I mean, this panel is obviously a perfect representation of how that is a trap. And I think sometimes when you check boxes, you think somehow that you're also not getting qualified folks. The way that we tried to frame the template of the inclusion rider is to ask the folks who are making those hiring decisions to deepen their candidate pool at the outset, so that the folks that they are looking at are qualified.
Snapping to that.
Right?
Yes.
It's not that hard to do.
All we're saying is just invite more people to come in and talk to you about the possibility.
And then the next step is to go one step further and to be very conscious in why you're making the hiring decision that you ultimately make. If you can find highly qualified folks from underrepresented backgrounds, seek out the opportunity to make that hiring decision. Make it consciously. Break through your stereotypes about who should be cast in what position or hold what role, and make very conscious choices about who you cast and who you hire. But, you know, I think Yolanda can speak to this because she obviously has tons of experience actually implementing this work. But I think for the overwhelming majority of crew roles, and without a doubt on screen roles, there is no reason that we can't be tapping into a much more diverse and, yes, highly qualified pool of folks for those jobs. And to me, that's what the inclusion rider gets at. It slows us down so we do the work consciously.
So essentially, in slowing things down, you're basically talking about getting people to do what should be done organically, right? Which is expand the pool, as Yolanda was saying, so that you can take a look at who else is out there, because everybody wins.
Well, that's right. But, you know, to do that, you got to cut through bias. And that's why we talk about slowing it down. Okay. That's exactly
right. Can I just mention really quick, please, as it's specific to slowing down, because here's what's going to happen. And I see it every day. I've seen it recently. This business operates on feast or famine. And what ends up happening and what has perpetuated this problem is that you get into a situation where all of a sudden everything has to go now.
Yeah.
And everybody's default is, I want to call all the people that I've worked with before, which, okay, you have a comfort level. And to a certain degree, there's a lot of value that comes with understanding that, you know, you're gonna have a shorthand, all of these different things. And a lot of times executives internally are making decisions quickly. You know, you're on a timeline, you're on a budget, constraint, whatever. And so you do have to be expedient. But what we need to interject into that process is an intentionality to say, we're going to, in the construct of that, we're also going to invite everybody in, because there still is a process of who we're going to decide we're going to hire. So in the construct of that, we're going to invite an inclusive pool of candidates to consider. And, I've seen I've seen times, not enough times, but people being surprised that there's a qualified, diverse candidate that they've never come across before or whatever. And it's because they're fishing in the wrong ponds, or they're not fishing in all the ponds available.
That's right.
I just wanted to
your point, Yolanda, and this is actually a great segue to bring Marcei on, a couple things we're doing after we've learned lots of important lessons in the last my goodness, so long, too many years at this point. One is we've got this FAQ document now. So all the excuses that we get up front are now in this FAQ. We're also starting a lot earlier in the process. So initially we were looking at, for Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, once they're starting to negotiate their contract, we're now pushing, we've got Kalpana retained at Pearl Street to start from development stage, so that we're already bringing that up as soon as we're, getting into the place where we can negotiate contracts. And the other thing, and this is a great way to bring Marcei in again, is that we're also including, along with the writer, a list of all the incredible databases that already exist out there. The JTC list, Crewvie, right? Respectability.org, all these resources and links that you can go to and find people, so that, again, that's not another excuse. Now, we don't want to do all their work for them, because then they'll look at those lists and say, can you tell me who to hire from these? Right. We said, no, we've given you enough. But Marcei, can you come on and tell us about Crewvie and how, that can help this process?
Sure. So Crewvie is an entertainment database designed for inclusion and diversity, and encompassing all people. My business partner and I, Jeanette, started it out of a see a need, fill a need, and we felt like we would go to cities and look for available crew in those cities, and it became very difficult in our accelerated prep to find people that were available and could work on our movies. So we just said, isn't there a database that we could just go on and look for people in these places and search and find them and hire them, because our process of vetting people or finding people was just taking so long. So we are true believers in part of our ethos is helping people, giving people opportunity, leveling people up. And it really became apparent that changing the landscape from the ground up was really important to us and very, very rewarding. So on Crewvie, you can go there and find anybody who self-identifies within their profile. You can find people. So there isn't an excuse anymore to not find people.
Kirsten,
I love it.
You in too, because what you do at Women in Film is such an important part of the pipeline for the folks who can then go be added to these lists. So you want to talk more, and also talk more about ReFrame.
Sure. We have a number of programs at WIF that are about developing those, both developing skill sets of our members and then helping them connect more deeply into the industry. Everything from our writing labs to Insight, which you mentioned, to our film finishing fund is all about helping women create sustainable careers. About 4 years ago, we launched ReFrame, which is a partnership between WIF and the Sundance Institute, along with about 85 ambassadors now, and 50 partner companies. And so that really is a systemic change project. So it's working with these companies within the industry to better understand where that bias, both the unconscious and the conscious bias, is occurring, and then put processes in place to mitigate that bias. And then, once that's done, people make films or television shows that have gender balanced productions, and they get the ReFrame stamp. So every year we've been seeing the number of stamps awarded to both films and television shows go up. And the goal is to have every single production get the stamp.
Kirsten, how do you, who does the analysis of whether or not you get this stamp?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a partnership with IMDb Pro, and so they provide the data, and then there's a criteria. So there's 8 points, and if you get 4 of the 8 points, you get the stamp. There's a lot of different ways to get it. And the points are awarded in front of the camera, behind the camera, include writers, directors, department heads, crew. So we're looking holistically at every part of a production to award the stamp.
Not to be a Debbie Downer for everyone, but the thing that I'm hearing from each of you is essentially you are having to slow down the process so that people are more intentional and conscious about the hiring that they're doing. So I'm really interested in how much pushback you've received, because I'm sure you all have. And then I'm also interested in how you have succeeded in navigating that and pushing back against that as well. So go ahead.
That's a good question. It's interesting because I think, with some exception, I think there's a lot of sincere interest in this work right now in the business, even within these big corporate studio environments, to pay attention to this. And then it needs to filter down to all the people who are making decisions that will impact it. So there's not really a lot of pushback from what I see. And actually there's a lot of, at least, I think a lot of it's sincere. And when it's not sincere, there's a lot of lip service to saying we're going to do this. But what needs to happen is that has to translate into actual hires. And so that's where the challenge arrives. And, going back again to, making those decisions and the pacing of what ends up happening. You have a project that's in development for however long and nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden, when something's happening, you're late.
Yeah.
And so there's this time constraint, and then everybody just says, oh, well, we just have to go and we just have to, do the things that we can do to keep this project on the tracks. And that usually means hiring all the people I know who can do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe what needs to happen is that all of those people who are saying they are on board have to commit to doing the work. And that does not, unfortunately, we can't slow down. So that means we need to be more effective in how we're approaching our jobs and the hiring and employing resources like Crewvie and other things, and not calling all the same people you called before who sent you all the same people who were not inclusive. You need to call other people to find these people to hire.
I think the other leverage point here is the outside organizing that's happening. I think about the work of that provides the kind of external pressure that maybe creates accountability for the folks who are making decisions to recognize that there are consequences for not doing what Yolanda has described. I mean, I think about, there are a whole number of them right now, particularly around racial equity issues, folks like Color of Change and Build Power that are figuring out that they have influence and a voice to change the process. And I think that outside organizing is not necessarily the work of anybody in this group, but is really an important kind of leverage point to create the pressure needed to move the work forward and to overcome the myriad excuses that we all hear.
I'd love to that point, uplift the name of Cheryl Bedford, who works tirelessly. She has Women of Color Unite and the JTC list. I believe they're at about 2,000 women. And her point for Women of Color Unite and the JTC list is that for some of these stamps and seals, you could still achieve the stamp without hiring a woman of color. And so her focus is very much there. And obviously that's important. I mean, women of color are still women, so they get you your stamp in both categories, right? And there's also Hugh You Know, and this is actually, if anybody is looking to be on lists, we should talk about how can they be on Crewvie. Hugh You Know is a Facebook group that's really terrific, and it's broadly filmmakers of color. Again, the JTC list. There's Posted Up, which is for post-production, Black post-production folks. Yeah, and again, respectability.org, which I don't think they keep a list, but these are folks in the diversity community. Yeah, and which one?
And Crewvie.com. It's a great resource.
So
people join Crewvie, Marcei?
You guys, I just wrapped a movie last week. We were lucky enough to be involved in a film, and I think it's, when you're involved in something so meaningful and you can attack it from the top and the bottom. So from the top, we have a producer who's from Afghanistan and a female Korean director. And then from the bottom, from Crewvie, you systematically want to change the landscape by giving people access and opportunity to be a part of a database where people can find people, and they're also available through, I've hired many people from streetlights. There's pathway programs that are a part of Crewvie. I mean, for me, I feel like you need to attack it from both ends, from the top and the bottom, and then it's going to change the landscape. And you have to be, you have to be committed, and I don't understand why it's not happening. I mean, on this movie, we had over 20. It was our idea to take a separate crew photo because we had over 20 women on our crew. So there's two crew photos. There's the crew photo, and then there's the female filmmakers crew photo that we put in everyone's crew gift. And I was super proud to be able to take that photo, and over 20 people on the crew were female of everything.
What does someone need to do to be listed in your database, Marcei?
Someone goes and they can register to Crewvie.com, and you can create a profile. And because we want to make it accessible to everyone, if you want to add all the wonderful things and celebrate yourself in your profile, it's $1 a month because we want to make it accessible for everyone. And in there, you can self-identify. You can say you're female over 40. You can, there's all kinds of attributes that you can check the box or not. You can talk about if you speak a different language, if you like to travel, if you are proficient in certain types of areas in budgets or countries or cities, or you have things to rent. It's really creating and celebrating yourself on your own profile so people can hire you and we can start making a change.
Marcei, I got a question for you specifically. We often hear about executive, the change that needs to happen from the top, and we've talked about that here. And Kirsten, maybe you could weigh in as well, all of you, but specifically Marcei, I'm thinking about this. What has been the reaction to you on the ground when it comes to hiring, people that need to be working behind the scenes on set? I'm curious about that.
I have to say, I hire a lot of qualified people. Yeah. Most of them are women, and I've actually never had any pushback. I don't know why. And they're everything from, like on this show, I had female electricians, and I mean, it just ran the gamut.
Yes,
that's fantastic.
I have to say yes to the female electricians,
right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it was fantastic, and it's not just the usual positions of the script supervisor, but it just ran through the whole department, and I've never had anyone pushback on me about any of that. And the director she did say that that's something she wanted to do, but I just do that anyway, just because they're the most qualified and they get the job done.
Can I just say about that just speaks to me about the power of creating cultures and leadership cultures that are genuinely equitable. The fact that you are both finding the folks and hiring them and then creating the space for them to be excellent and not judged in their work is like layers of awesome from the standpoint of an employment lawyer who sees workplaces that are all kinds of messed up. Like, you know, to see that thread run all the way through, not just the hiring, but the way that folks can be in their work is really inspiring. I
just want to echo that because, you know, I've worked in diversity and inclusion in different scenarios a lot. And I actually have done some other things where I've commented publicly about it. And we need to be intentional about this work, but this work does not have to be hard. And the reason it doesn't have to be hard is because there are plenty of people out there who can do it. All we have to do is just say, we're going to hire them. And it doesn't need to be a thing. It doesn't need to be approved. It doesn't need to be sanctioned. It doesn't need to be an initiative. It just needs to be a decision that that's what we're going to do. And in the case of Marcei's film, she went out and hired people who were qualified. She probably didn't get any pushback because the people were qualified. There's no, you just go and do it. It's so easy. I love that. It's so easy. We make it so hard because I don't know why.
Well, because independent producing that can happen, but what we're still hearing a lot from the studios and networks is that, you know, the lists are way more diverse, people they're bringing in to meet with are more diverse, but when it comes to, you know, actually making the hiring decision, that there's some really deeply entrenched values that are not changing, right?
Because of those people who are making those decisions.
That's what has to change, right? So there's like people who are still saying things like, well, she hasn't done a $50 million.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But that question never comes up when it's a usual suspect who hasn't done that size production or hasn't done blah, blah, blah.
We will say
that's my new term, usual suspect.
Okay, we'll say white cisgendered male. that question, right? And that question doesn't come up. That's hence the what is it? Carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. Like that we see that in so many cases, right? And I'd love to expand this a little bit because we've got, well, I'll admit this is my brother Winston and I love him, but he does have a question about, and I think especially Kalpana and Kirsten may be able to speak to this, like in what ways does the work that we're doing for DEI in Hollywood expand out to other industries? Because we know, Yolanda, as you're saying, what do you call them?
The usual suspects.
The usual suspects are everywhere, right, in all industries. So maybe Kirsten and Kalpana can address that. And yeah,
Kirsten, go ahead.
I think there's two parts of that, right? Because we're creating content that's getting, you know, streamed around the world, the images that people see on screen affect, you know, how they perceive women, people of color, differently abled people, et cetera. And so we have a huge responsibility, I think, in this industry to ensure that the images that represent the human population actually do represent the human population. And so that's where some of the change happens. And then I think in any industry that has best practices and are sharing them publicly, that changes other industries. So, you know, everything from the inclusion rider to the ReFrame stamp has a ton of best practices in there that can be, I mean, some of them we learned from other industries, and other industries can then learn from us.
Are you talking to other industries though? I mean, I'm a journalist, and as you well know, public media is going through its own reckoning. So what can you tell us?
We are talking to other industries. So Fanshen and I have been working with folks in tech. I've worked with folks in other performing arts. We've been, and I work with folks in the law all the time, which is itself a huge industry. So yes, I think there is space for this work. There is no question that there's space for this work in lots of industries and those conversations. And in fact, the inclusion rider is finding its way into other industries, sports, tech, et cetera. I want to just build on one point about that I think follows both on what Yolanda and Kirsten have said, which is that I think that what often happens, and I see this all the time, and not just in Hollywood, but in lots of industries, is that we rely on shortcuts, on a set of proxies that we use to judge who's qualified for what role, right? Like, have you previously directed a film of XYZ budget? How many films? Oh, this is the person that I go to all the time. And one of the things that I like to talk about a lot is that we have to challenge and complicate our proxies. Because if we keep relying on the same proxies, we're going to get the same result. And so, you know, one of the things that I think we're seeing here is this thinking about what are actually the qualifications you need to do the job. And they're probably not the qualifications that the usual suspects have told you are the ones that you need to look at. You know, in order to be a terrific lawyer and a terrific writer, you don't have to have clerked for a federal judge. That's one that I go through all the time for my profession, where we seem to only hire folks who have had federal clerkships. Well, you're already cutting down your pool if you rely on proxies that are, you know, that reflect kind of old norms about who is qualified to do the job. And so for the decision makers who are looking at this, I think there are questions about, like, what are the comps? What are appropriate comps for films that should be greenlit, right? And you wind up using the same comps that reflect old standards for what's profitable and what's not. And so I think starting to really explicitly ask about who is qualified for what and what criteria are being used to make those decisions can help us to explode some of the stereotypes that I think Kirsten and Yolanda and Marcei all have kind of referred to. How do you blow up those stereotypes in the decision making? And I think it's going one level deeper to really examine what people are actually relying upon and why it's so problematic.
And so I have to ask, because we are in the time of COVID, how everything that we have talked about, which we know pre-COVID was a challenge in of itself. How are you seeing it in an industry that had to shut down for a while, and you know, Hollywood is picking itself back up? How is everything that you're talking about? And I'd like each of you to respond to that, and you maybe as well, Fantian, actually. How has COVID exacerbated those challenges, or has there not been a change at all?
And I can start a little bit. So early on in the pandemic, in the first couple of weeks, we started seeing data coming out about women overall, right, and the impact of COVID. I just read a statistic even from September that said 4 times as many women as men lost their jobs. Or have left the workforce. If you're reading any kind of media, you've seen some of this information, right? It's everything from the kinds of jobs that women are in to leaving because they've got to do homeschool or childcare or whatever, or elder care, like whatever all those different issues are. And so we launched a campaign starting this summer when the industry started going back to work called Hire Her Back. To really encourage all the studios and networks to pay attention to that data and try to work against that happening in our industry. We haven't seen concrete numbers come out of the entertainment industry yet, but the anecdotal that we're hearing isn't great, right? So that women are losing their jobs at higher rates than men for all of those same reasons. And I think we have to really stay focused on this and kind of double down. So all the work all of us here were already doing around diversity, inclusion, and equity is now even more important just to keep the numbers where they were, let alone increase them, which is the ultimate goal. I'm sorry,
what for you, Kirsten, what does that look like?
How do you do that?
Yeah, how do you double down so that we can keep those levels there?
Right. So the first thing that we're doing is we launched a fund that is being administered by the Actors Fund to provide just a little bit of a cushion, just money for people to say, like, hey, if a couple $1,000 it's going to help you pay your bills and stay, in Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York, and these production hubs and stay in the business, we're offering that. So that was kind of the first place we started. I think the second place is to continue the campaigns and the information, kind of what Kalpana was talking about those external forces putting pressure on the industry. I think that the external forces plus the insiders who make noise, you know, who aren't afraid to kind of call stuff out when it's happening, or to say to their boss, or if they are the boss, to stay on track around, you know, we can't have quotas, but we can have goals or targets, but to stay on track around the targets and to be vocal about it. Yeah, I'm sure others have otherwise thoughts on that, but there's a start.
Please, yeah. Yolanda, do you have any thoughts?
You know, it's interesting because I feel like we've all had our relationship with this COVID quarantine pandemic period, and it's been hard for all sorts of reasons for every different person. But one thing that I've often tried to find the positives of COVID, which is very hard to do.
But they do exist, I agree.
But one positive of COVID, I feel like in this regard, unfortunately, not enough people are seeing it from this perspective, is so we had this tremendous work stoppage because of COVID, necessarily for safety reasons. And now we have this situation where we're bringing it all back. And by the way, everything is coming back and it's busy. It's like everything's come back with a force. People were waiting. It was like a pent-up energy to come back to production. But from my perspective, if people will buy into the opportunity right now of things coming back and the intentionality that we keep talking about, here is a great chance to make an impact in diversity and inclusion when you're bringing people back to work. Unfortunately, it's not happening really from what I can see. You know, the first calls are the usual suspects. But if we all say, this is what we want to do, we're committed, and we have, we either have existing projects that are coming back to production, or we have new projects that were on hold and now we're hiring people. Here is probably the biggest opportunity this industry has seen yet to make a tremendous impact on who is getting hired. So if you're serious about it, if you're committed to it, you should just be. Here's the thing, it doesn't have to be, no one's looking for a hand. All you have to do is decide, I want my productions and I want my content in front of and behind the camera to look like the world around me. And so that's the people that I'm inviting in to try and get my work done. And it doesn't have to be hard. And here's the thing, I do want to say, like, the people who prove it, like I always say to people, you can't give me the excuse because there's already people who have proved that this is achievable.
Yes.
Number one, Ava DuVernay with Queen Sugar. That woman has hired all female directors. And by the way, if you look at that roster of female directors, they could not be more different. Absolutely. I mean, you could have the widest spectrum. They're all so different. And she did that while so many other people were saying, well, we want to hire women directors, but we just can't find them and they're not available and blah, blah. Somehow she managed to do it. Right. Another example, Ryan Murphy, who I've cited in other cases, he had a situation long ago when he was shooting Feud, and he had a specific, few episodes, one in particular that he wanted a female director. Unfortunately, she became unavailable and he ended up with a male director. It was the impetus for him starting Half Initiative. And because of that happening, he got so disgusted about it. And he said, I want to have equity. I want to have equal gender representation of female directors. And so from now on, he started Half Initiative, and he went in 1 year from 16% female directors in his content to 60%. And it was just about making the decision. And guess what? It wasn't about like, oh, well, this person isn't ready, but we're going to have them shadow and they're okay, blah, blah, blah. No, he got qualified people. So it just does not have to be hard. And so this represents an opportunity to do those kinds of things.
I totally agree.
Right. Yeah.
I also think that I agree fully with both Yolanda and Kirsten's remarks. And I guess I also think that I'll go back to sort of the role of outside groups here. I think that the accountability piece of this, you know, particularly as we reckon with racial justice again, you know, is important to force an industry forward, right? I mean, obviously the status quo serves someone's interest, or it wouldn't be the status quo. And so challenging that requires all the tools, the top, the bottom, and the outside. And I think that the measurement and accountability piece of it is really essential for moving a status quo to a new status quo, right? Like, you know, if you're going to change something that's powerful, it's not easy to do, and we're going to continue to get the same excuses lobbed at us about why it can't be done, or why we're in a hurry, or now why, because of COVID, we can't spend any time or energy on this. And I think, you know, part of sort of calling out the excuses is knowing that there are folks out there who are doing the work to show that these are excuses. And that to me is like another really important part of the work of moving us forward.
Kalpana, will you talk a little bit about the accountability piece of the inclusion writer, which also tends to get lost in the conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think this really goes to Yolanda's point of why it doesn't actually have to be this hard. You know, that these are goals that are eminently achievable. But what we did in order to kind of overcome some of the criticisms of other similar initiatives in the past, where it seemed easy to game them, easy to sort of talk the talk but not walk the walk, was that we built in basically a monetary penalty, where if the inclusive hiring targets that you have set through your inclusion rider aren't satisfied, that the production, the studio, is going to kick in some funds to a fund that supports the work of underrepresented storytellers. And so there's a little bit of pain, but as I say all the time, there's no reason you actually have to reach that provision, because as Yolanda has said, there are highly qualified folks out there. Just go hire them. You know, Marcei's doing it every day. So you don't have to find yourself in that sort of compliance paragraph of the inclusion rider. But we felt it was really important to ensure that there was some backstop to the promises, so that they didn't become lip service and actually really accomplish the change that we're trying to see.
Which
I love that that's in there. Have you, has anybody had to put money in the fund yet?
You beat me to it. That's the question.
Why would you need to? The word, I mean, it's totally achievable, but we felt like it was
so easy. Yeah.
It's
so
easy. And Kirsten's like, and why didn't the funds come to WIF at that? We got you.
Totally favorable provision, right? Like, some A-lister out there, take the inclusion rider and go do something with it.
What's the fee? How much? What's the penalty, or does it change?
Really, it varies entirely based on the production, right? But it's a percentage of the back.
A gazillion dollars.
A gajillion billion, as my children would say, a Google plaque dollar.
Yes.
But right, that is one of the pieces of the inclusion rider that when we really stress that it's a template, and you know, we're on the end of pushing for it to be as much as we can get, but also where that's part of the negotiation. But Marcei, I was going to ask you, so one of the pieces of pushback we've gotten recently on the inclusion rider is COVID. So it was we can't add this to our agenda. It's frustrating to hear, because we're like, this, why is it that all this time and energy could be put into COVID measures, which it should be, but why weren't you spending that time? If you had been spending that extra time and energy that you're putting in now towards inclusion before, we wouldn't have to ask. So Marcei, I guess on your end, how can we respond when we get that kind of pushback?
Isn't it the people who are running?
Wouldn't it be Matt or Ben? Right, the people who are in the positions. I mean,
so the people sitting at the table making the decisions about that.
I kind of reject that argument unless you're talking about a project that is already existing and established and mature with a set of cast and crew that's already there. If you're asking for add-ons, then that is potentially a conversation. If you're talking about a new production, then I'm hearing that argument as I can't hire inclusively because of COVID. And I don't understand that argument. I don't understand that argument. If you're going to be hiring people, why can't you hire inclusively for a new project?
Understand how that's
I don't understand the issue.
Neither.
Well, so to get
Marcei and I we have mind meld right now.
I appreciate it. I will say it is that it is too much of a lift for the attorneys to include this in all the other things that they have to consider.
To me, that is, I mean, yet another excuse, right? Because ultimately,
completely,
the is not actually that big a deal. It's just a hiring process.
The statement in saying that is saying that there are no qualified people and you're adding a burden to me. That's what they're saying. If you're talking about a brand new project and they're saying you're adding something that now we need to add on top of COVID, is making an implicit argument that I now need to add additional people who aren't qualified to my project.
Shame on those people.
I reject that statement.
Shame on those people. What are their names?
Exactly.
Yes. Well, to keep the positions we're in for the moment, we will not share names, but we will just say that if you are listening and you've used that excuse, we ain't having it. You all are amazing. And Marcei, did you want to talk any more about what was it like? Obviously, you managed to do this during COVID. Are there things that the rest of us should be thinking about as we kind of go in? Well, Marcei and Yolanda, as we start to, from our end, kind of do development and productions, are there things that we should be thinking about right away to prepare for it?
Yolanda, let me know what you think about this, but I think that it starts from the top. I think casting plays a big part. I think if there's inclusion in casting, it's like, why wouldn't there be? And then the producer and the director, again, why wouldn't there be? It's just, I mean, that sets the tone, and then that's just part of making the movie.
I was glad to hear, Fantian, that you guys have these discussions in the development phase and very early, because I have observed over, I won't say exactly when, but over the last few years of you get to a point where you're, on a project and you're deciding who are all the creative elements behind that, be it, above the line or below the line. And sometimes if that inclusion conversation happens when you're way down and people are like, oh, well, we've narrowed it down to 3 people and now here are the people and we're shooting in 6 weeks, there's no time to then try to interject. Oh, we want you to have a meeting with XYZ. Like, it needs to be communicated in the early stages. Our expectation is that you're going to consider from the outset an inclusive pool.
I am kind of blown away by this conversation. I'm listening to you all, right? You're all badasses, to quote Fantian. But at the same time, I'm sitting there going, and we say this all the time, why are we still having this conversation, right? That essentially we're talking about having to create contracts so that people can do something organically, what they should be doing organically.
I know.
And I'm listening to you all going,
I know.
So, and I guess this is my next question. How do you actually get on with your actual jobs while you're trying to get people to do what they should be doing in the first place? I want all of you to answer that. I'm going to mute myself and sit back. And
well, it is my actual job.
That's right.
But it's your job.
Go,
but
Kirsten.
it's like,
oh,
I'll just say this really quickly is that, like, sexism and racism are thousands and thousands of years old, right? So it's not going to be undone. WIF is going to be, we're going to be 50 years old in 2 years. So we've been working this for 50 years. And
you're going to be around forever.
Progress. I mean, when the organization was started, there was not a single female VP at any studio or network. And there hadn't been since like the 20s. So, we definitely have seen change and we're seeing it. But I'll let those of you who are more on the ground every day talk a little bit.
I mean, just really quick from my perspective, it's an everyday hill to climb, because as wonderful as my words might sound, I don't always feel as effective in making change, because I have my day-to-day to deal with, and I have to get a certain amount of work done and a certain amount of production done, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't have the ultimate decision in various things. So I'm needing to collaborate with people who do. And the buy-in of all of those people plays a factor, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a constant conversation. It's a constant conversation and a willingness. And thankfully, in the last couple of years, there's been enough of a public awareness around this to make it, you might have already deduced that I'm not a shy person, so I've never been a shy person, but for those people who are, there's enough public discourse to kind of give them some support to be saying this, to repeat it. So I take the opportunities that I have to be able to remind people, hey, what are we doing? Are we trying to look at some other people, blah, blah, blah. And like I say, people are mostly open to hearing that. Whether they're sincere in trying to make a change is a different conversation, but at least I'm able to continue to say, hey, we need to be paying attention to this.
I want to add that I can see how that would be, Yolanda, I can see how that would be something every day that you would, be thinking about and trying to correct. I can say that one of the rewarding and best parts about being a producer is being able to, in whatever small way that I can, make a change, help somebody, give somebody access, opportunity. That's the most rewarding part of what I'm able to do at this level, honestly.
That's so amazing, honestly. I mean, that's just it's incredible for the folks who are on the ground. I feel removed from it and tired by it. And one of the things that I think has been a source of strength for me in doing this work, both in terms of film and television, but just in the rest of the work I do as a civil rights lawyer, is the fellowship and sisterhood of other people who are engaged in making change. It's a source of strength for me, and I leave conversations like this energized to go do the next thing, and that is, at least for me, part of how I try to show up every day. Some days are much harder than others. And certainly in the last 4 years, we've had, at least in the work I do, a lot of really hard days.
I would say also, to add to that, for Jeanette and I to have created Crewvie for that reason as well, is to just let people in and to, have an access point, and then to give people no excuse not to, deliver, not to have any excuse not to find qualified people.
I started off the first couple of years because so much of the work was focused on the inclusion writer, and also just kind of doing a lot of internal reflection at the company, just around like, what does white fragility mean, as an example, right? Like any of that kind of critical race theory that you should be doing if you really want change in the world. But I saw clearly that the way that I could have the most impact was in putting myself in a position where I could get people hired. So I really switched for the last couple of years into development. And it has made a huge difference. Again, is exactly what Marcei said, being able to now start a project from the beginning with the kinds of folks that I know will not only contribute to the pipeline themselves, but hire people who are contributing to the pipeline has made a huge difference. And the other thing I do a lot of is pushing back on the idea, this kind of goes to this question of quotas that we talked about in the beginning, where I can sometimes be seen in my development role as the person who's going to bring the Black stories. And yes, I am. And I got all kinds of, amazing Black storytellers that I want to help lift up. But I also am, passionate about stories of Indigenous folks and Asian folks. And also with something that I think is clear that we all do, especially when it comes to casting, is pushing back on the idea of white as the default for human. So at work, a lot of times, instead of just saying, well, I'm going to bring you the Black stories, I'm also going to bring you a rom-com where the cast should also, again, look like what the world looks like, and not just what we've all bought into as, when it's, rom-com starring white leads, we just say it's two people. No, it's two white folks, and Black folks fall in love too, and Indigenous folks fall in love too. And so that's a big part of what I've been able to position myself to do, so I don't burn out on the inclusion stuff and educating others.
And to that point, just a little, I've seen a little bit in the chat, I realize in a lot of these conversations that I have that sometimes the conversation is the specific language might focus on particular groups or whatever, but I know for me, and I'm sure for the rest of my panelists, it is inclusive of all. When we talk about representation and, looking like the world, that means everybody. That means I was recently, we've had an interesting election, and one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that I'm super excited. I'm as excited as I am to have a woman in a high office, and as excited as I am to have an African-American woman in a high office, I am equally excited to have an Asian-American woman in that high office. And had it been Pete Buttigieg, I would have been equally excited to have him in that office. Absolutely. It would have been so amazing. So this conversation is about putting our arms around all of the community, and like we say, representing what we see, what we walk around in the world and see among us.
I want to remind anyone who's listening that if you want to post any questions, you can do. We have one here, which actually kind of connects to where this conversation had paused. From Mel Orpen, are members of the LGBTQ community included in the inclusion rider? I think that's an important point that we should.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Yes. I mean, look, if you look at our inclusion rider template, we take an expansive approach to diversity, and we'll continue to press that boundary to include differently abled people, members of the LGBTQ plus community. Age, I think, is an important lens, particularly for women in the industry, that can lead to multiple and intersectional layers of discrimination. And so, yes, the answer is yes. And I think this is Yolanda's point as well. Let's think about expanding the pool of opportunity for anybody who's been left behind by the status quo in whatever industry we're talking about here. Obviously, we're talking about film, but I think that expansive approach to diversity is really important.
Cool.
This is also on Crewvie as well, this attribute.
And one of the great things about Crewvie is that it's beginning to collect all the different pieces of data that then can be used to report back to the industry. So right now, even on IMDb, which is such an incredible resource, it doesn't, there's gender data, but there's no LGBTQ or race or ability. And so,
ability, yeah.
When any of us are putting out anything related to counting, it's really hard because the data doesn't exist. But like
other languages, Marcei's, I just want everybody out there to know that Marcei's being modest about Crewvie. It is super exceptional. Whatever you do, you need to go and check it out after this. It is amazing. It is amazing. Underutilized tool yet. I fully expect it to be the industry standard at some point in the future. So I just have to say that.
Yes. There you go.
And for WIF members, you can list your membership that you're part of WIF.
Thank you.
Marcei,
that was so nice. I don't know if I said this before, but the Entertainment Industry Foundation, we were chosen to work with many pathway programs here, and we're also the pathway program for some major studios here, and where people are hiring not only on the physical production side of TV and film and docs and all those other great places, but also in the corporate side. So here's another way for people to break in on the corporate side, because we don't want to forget about that side either, because those are the folks that we systemically change.
Absolutely. And again, that can expand to all kinds of other workers, right? Like have a list of folks ready and available, and qualified to work. Marcei, are you going to remember us all when you just blow up and like you're in the New York Times and like you still?
Ladies, this gives me hope. All of you.
I got to say, believe it or not, I said feel free to ask questions. People are. So let me see if we can get through some of these. Okay. We kind of touched on this, but I'll ask it again. How is the adoption of the inclusion rider going?
Great question.
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's the thing about, let me say it this way. I think there is meaningful progress on the inclusion rider and an adoption of it. Fanshen and I are actually in the middle of negotiations on several. So I think that's really excellent. The thing I will also say about the inclusion rider is that it's hard to know, because we put our template out there and because it's a contract. Sometimes people are talking about inclusion writers like Michael B. Jordan's team, and sometimes they're just doing the work and not talking about it. And I think that's fine, right? Like, to me, the way that we're going to measure whether this is the inclusion writer is another tool. It's a tool to do the work that all of us are doing, and that Yolanda and Marcei in particular are just walking the walk on. And the inclusion writer is, the idea behind it, right, is that people with power, it's a pressure point for people with power to use their power to do something. But it's not the only way we make change. And so I think for me, one of the most powerful sort of dimensions of the inclusion rider is the way that it has at least transformed some conversations about hiring and needing to make sure that our processes are consistent. We've definitely seen inclusion rider principles be adopted. There was a big flurry, right after the Oscars, of people developing their own kind of policies based on the inclusion rider. And I know that it is being implemented behind the scenes in ways that I wish I could sort of talk publicly about, but I can't.
I'll have to say also, to all of our point about holding folks accountable, feel free to go to all of the social media accounts of anybody who said they'd be using it, and look at the films that have come out with them, involved in them since then, and ask them what's going on. Kalpana and I get that question a lot for us, and we're kind of like, ask the person who said they were going to do it, because we're just bringing it into the negotiation, and truly we mean it. And I appreciate being asked, because it constantly, I can then go back to work and say, we're being asked about this, and that's important.
Yeah, it's important. The accountability piece is important.
Hold everybody accountable. That all these black squares, all for everything, any statement that anyone's making, hold us accountable, please.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So here's another question connected to that from Ida Lee Henderson. She says most crew level positions are hired. So maybe this is Marcei. It might be all of you. Most crew level positions are hired by a department head. A woman or person of color might be hired on a show because it was required by the showrunner or producer, but not as accepted as part of the team and then not rehired on the job. How would you suggest we deal with the systemic racism and sexism that is rampant in the entertainment industry? Marcei, I'm going to ask you first.
The department heads need to be diversity. I mean, we had a Korean female production designer, at a female prop master. I mean, you hire the department heads, and then you know that they set the tone for their own department, and there shouldn't be an issue with the folks that work within their department.
Right. I mean, I wonder if what she's
also got to disrupt this.
Yep.
You've got to disrupt this narrative that this is a diversity hire.
Yeah, totally.
Here's the thing. Everything I've said is about hiring qualified people. We're not opening the doors to qualified people. Now, let's talk about what qualified means. If you're looking to have an underrepresented person walk in with a resume that is equal to the guy who just gets hired because whatever reason, then that's not going to happen, because unfortunately, opportunity has not presented itself enough to a lot of these underrepresented groups to fill up a resume with these impressive credits. So then what you need to look at is, what are the functions that need to be performed? What are the capabilities that are transferable to the job that you're hiring for? And then how are they performing? That's not a diversity hire. That's a hire.
Yeah.
And if they're doing the job, then they should not be being viewed through that lens and being punished or penalized because people are trying to right the ship.
Or a box checked.
Or a box checked. It's just not, we're getting rid of that. This narrative that so-and-so took my job. Why is it your job? Who said it was your job?
I also think that sort of description of systemic racism that the person asking the question offered is one that is rampant. I mean, across American industry. This is not unique to Hollywood. We see it all the time, where women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ community face hostility in the workplace, and I will say this as a civil rights and employment lawyer, there are equal opportunity laws that are intended to provide a backstop on some of this behavior. And so, where you're facing workplace hostility that's overt or systemic, it's hard. And I know it's particularly hard in an industry that blacklists people, but it's really important to find a way to come forward. And if there are others who are experiencing the same thing you are, they will draw strength from your coming forward. You don't have to come forward publicly, right? But there are workplace protections that exist for a reason to tackle hostility in the workplace. I've heard about horrible things in writers' rooms. I've heard about horrible things, being faced by women, by people of color, and members of the LGBT community. That's employment discrimination, and we should call it that.
People can also call the WIF helpline. We have a helpline that's available 5 days a week, and services whoever answers the phone can help you no matter what, but we have direct services available in Los Angeles, Atlanta, and New York.
Awesome.
Well, one of the things, I just want to mention this, one of the things I think this ties into it. One of the things on Crewvie, which Jeanette and I thought was really important, was to help change the landscape, was when people sign up, say it's from they're breaking into that beginner level, is that even though they say that they're working as a PA, but maybe they're interested in visual effects, or maybe they're interested in being an editor, or art department. There's a choice on there. They can say aspiring. I'm an aspiring writer. I'm an aspiring editor. I'm an aspiring VFX supervisor. Otherwise, how would you know what people want to do? And that way, when you hire people, I did a big movie last year where I had a great opportunity to hire 3 PAs from the Streetlights program, and I asked them what departments they wanted to be in, and they chose the departments they wanted to be in. One was in hair and makeup, one was in set lighting, and the other one was in craft service, and they worked along with those departments, and then I was able to help them get into the union. But I mean, if you help people by knowing what they're interested in, it propels them, I think, into being quicker into the position or the departments that they're interested in, and that's helped changing it.
So then we don't have very long, but how to all of you, if you're able to answer this, for someone who's trying to break into the industry, someone has asked, you talked about this, Marcei, but you know, if someone's trying to break into the industry, what advice would you give them if they're dealing with you know, these barriers in the time of COVID? Sorry, I have to keep saying that because it's nuts. Anyone want to take that on?
Kirsten, I think you've recently opened up Women in Film so that the requirements for becoming a member are is that right? That it's not quite as stringent as before? I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it for years. And we finally did relaunch our membership last week, and we took away the need for a referral letter. So now, and we also added another level, like a lower priced level. And so now there are a lot of different ways that you can participate as a member and at different economic levels. Yeah, I heard the tail end of that question. I was reading there was a question about parenting and work. It came up in the chat in my head, so it went off in that direction.
Let me just throw something before we get on the parenting thing, just real quick on that. That's something that just popped into my head, which I don't know that anyone would have any interest in, but is a big part of the conversation in the context of COVID, which is, as we are navigating COVID, we necessarily need people who are dedicated to safety as it pertains specifically to COVID. And so there's been this explosion on every production of needing people who function as that role. They call it different things on different productions. Sometimes it's, you know, the COVID compliance officer, sometimes it's a health and safety officer, et cetera. No matter what they call it, this is an integral role right now to keep us going in production right now. And there was a lot of discussion of who are these people? What are their qualifications? Where are we going to find them? And given the amount of production that's going on everywhere around the world, and every production has to have multiple individuals, if this is something that, if you're looking for an entry point, it's an excellent, and you're not finding a way to get in, that's a great place to have an entry point, because you're going to need to touch the entire production and you're going to meet people and make connections. And if you have an interest in something else, it's a good place to start meeting people and understanding all of those functions. And we do not have enough people to do that work right now.
We should mention, because all these women are such badasses, they have given us their time, way more time today. And I know all of you have lots to do. So we're going to get close to wrapping up. Kirsten, as you mentioned, there is an important question about mothers and the challenges there. I wonder if maybe Kirsten or Kirsten.
I'm going to say Kalpana.
Okay, Kalpana. Yep. Good. And then yes, that'll be our last Q&A, and then we've got a little something to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was like scanning through it and trying to make sure I got all of it. It's a very thoughtful question, and I think it raises a really important issue, again, not limited to Hollywood, about the role of caregivers and in particular, the way that mothers face discrimination throughout our economy. I actually litigate pregnancy discrimination cases, and This shows up in lots of different ways. The question is about, what do you do when somebody asks you about whether you are a parent? And, in most cases, that is not allowed under federal law, right? You cannot ask people if they have children or if they are pregnant. Those questions are improper, and certainly under California law, I think the same is true. I think the harder question is, what does somebody do in that situation? Because you can't, if you're applying for a job, you can't call out the potential employer for asking you discriminatory questions. I would say if you don't get the job, you should absolutely, then no fear, go report it, right? And I think a lot of big companies now, particularly studios, should have HR departments and ombuds people that are dealing with these issues. And I'd encourage that as a pathway. And again, I'm a litigator, right? So I use a certain set of tools, but I think it's important where people experience these things to find a way to report it. If multiple reports go in about a particular employer, it will raise questions among the enforcement agencies to look more closely at what's happening. And ultimately, this is actually what sort of inspired me to do the work I do now, is that I was looking for ways to change problematic systems. And our employment practices all over the country are deeply problematic. And you're pointing at, those who are in charge. And one of the ways to get at that is to create accountability for them in a way that doesn't hurt you. And that's why we have enforcement agents.
Okay, we had a comment which was, this conversation's making a person sad, and so we are going to end on a happy note, because and we get it. We also get it for all there are challenges out there, but our martini shot, our happy note here is, we'll ask you each to tell us what gives you hope.
Maybe I'll start really quickly.
Go for it.
This group of women gives me hope. Truly.
100%.
I'm so inspired.
Yep, I second that 100%. I feel the same way. It takes folks like us to make a change and more conversation about it, and just being open and honest, and just, there needs to be more of these. And all of you women are amazing, amazing people, and I'm so honored to be here with you.
I third that, and I'll add all the women kind of working behind the scenes here as well, including our interpreters who are also on camera. And then the other thing is, to the woman who asked the question about parenting, my girls, my 6-year-old and my 10-year-old, who, like, it makes you even emotional, because I feel like they are like the empathy or the resilience, their sense of justice, like, that's going to build a new world.
And boys who get it. I'm raising two of them.
Yay!
My son said the other day, I heard him in his Zoom class talk about how Greta Thunberg and Kamala Harris were his heroes. And I thought, okay.
Yeah.
I think something is going okay this year, 2020. Yeah. Something is going okay. I love Kirsten's point about kids coming up.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Like, sadly, I have to make deliberate efforts to find hope in things. And unfortunately, the last many months, I've had a hard time finding them. But the one thing that has been that hope has been, and I generally don't talk a lot about my kids, but the thing that is interesting, something of a struggle that I have, I call it a struggle right now for lack of a better term, but I have this dichotomy of, like, I was a very idealistic kid, very idealistic. And I grew up in a very pretty homogenous upbringing. So I had a view of the world of, like, oh, I'll just do my best and do all the work, and then the world will open up to me. And then here I am, jaded lady later, but So it's been this thing of like, how do I teach my children the balance of the idealism and the realism? And that's been my focus. And listening to them reflect back to me that those teachings is what gives me hope. They have the idealism and the realism. And it's their generation, and watching their generation and watching what's been happening and hoping that they will be the bulk of what we see come in the future versus some of the madness that we continue to see every day is what gives me hope.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. This has been great. And you all absolutely give me hope. I love every time I learn something new. Marcei, you're my new best friend. You didn't even know it. This has been so wonderful. Christabel, I think you're wrapping us up. Yes?
I am. So my martini shot is the same. I love having these conversations, and I think each and every one of you is incredible. And I was taking notes while you were talking, and I hope that we get the opportunity to talk, break bread, and try and figure out some of these solutions. And like you, I have 2 young kids. Fanshen knows all about my 5 and 8-year-old, and likewise, they're just incredible, resilient people, as we are discovering, and they inspire me and challenge me every day. but everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This is where we're going to end it, everybody. I wish we could keep going, but like Fanshen said, we've got to move on. So I want to thank you, Yolanda, Kirsten, Kalpana, Marcei, and thank you to Green Slate for being the presenting sponsor for this series. You can find them on gslate.com. And thank you to Alicia and Rory and Pro Bono ASL for providing interpreter services. That was fantastic. And thank you to Catch a Break for podcast for producing this. And you can catch them at catchabreakpodcast.com, all one word. And you can find us, our podcast, Fanshen's and my podcast, Sista Brunch, at sisterbrunch.com. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This was incredible. I'm so happy that I could be here. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.